Time for another week of, oh, hey, did you know this? Because I didn't. This week, I learned a little something about the collaborative process. Namely, that the role of writer in an artist-writer comic-making duo is a lot more involved than I initially realized. In my bumpy career as an artist, I've worked a handful of times with others to create short comics. And in that time, I always saw the division of labor when working with a writer as they come up with a general idea and I'm the one who actually makes it. This made sense to me. After all, I'm the one with the artistic skills, I'm the one who should understand paneling, composition, and pacing. I'm the one who turns their words into a work of art. Turns out, I was making my job way harder than it needed to be. No shade to anyone I've worked with previously, none of us had any reason to understand the true division of labor between writer and artist. This revelation came to me while I was flipping through the extra content at the back of the print for Batman Year One. In the extras, they show several examples of the pages going from script to sketches. What surprised me was just how much detail there was in the script, particularly as it related to how many panels were on each page, what was happening in those panels, and even what types of shots certain panels were. I'm not sure why it never occurred to me that the writer would be the one to decide what the pages look like. After all, it's the writer's job to make sure they write a story that fits within certain page constraints. It would be the writer who has to figure out the pacing to make sure a big 2-page spread lands on 2 consecutive pages, or that a big reveal comes after a page flip. Once I spent more than 10 seconds thinking about it, it all made sense. Writers have a lot more to do than just decide on the dialogue and vaguely describe what's happening at important moments. Maybe because I'm both the writer and the artist for my comic, it never occurred to me where my job as a writer ended and where my role as the artist began. This made me reflect on my relationship with my scripts. If I were to hand my scripts off to someone else to turn into a comic, would they be able to? Sure, but it would look nothing like what I made, and the artist may hate me by the end. My panel descriptions in my scripts can usually be best described as, I know what I meant when I wrote that. Fine for me, terrible for anyone else. What does it mean to be a writer for comics? How much do you really need to know about panels, composition, and pacing to be successful at passing your vision along to the artist? How much vision is really required when you're in the scriptwriting process? These are all questions I had, and that's plenty enough topic material for a newsletter or two, so I dove right in. Let's talk scripts. In my quest to learn more about writing scripts for comics, the first thing I did was seek out some examples. The scripts from the back of Batman Year One were a starting point, but I'd never be so naive as to look at a single comic's work and call that the standard. Fortunately, the internet is a treasure trove of script examples, and a lot of script writing advice that I often found dubious at best. I'll explain why in a minute. I found several examples online of scripts for existing comics. Clearly, an artist was able to take these scripts and turn them into finished products, so they had some merit to the way they were written. I went through several examples, trying to identify patterns where I could and making notes about how each script visually presented itself along the way. And you know what standards I found? None. Okay, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. There are standards, but you have to squint and tilt your head a bit and ignore the peanut gallery trying to tell you what the real standards are to see them. Let's just get this out of the way right now. Writing for comics has no one true standard. Anyone who tries to tell you that it does is either parroting misinformation or is trying to sell you something. It took me less than 10 minutes of internet perusing to come to this conclusion. Now, are there potentially comic companies out there that do have templates and guidelines for the writers they have on staff? Probably. Does that make it the standard? No. It makes it the way your team does it. The second you jump ship to a new company, I guarantee you there will be differences in how they work and what they expect, as evidenced by the sheer variety of comic scripts I was able to find. A lot of this variety can likely be attributed to the wonderful fact that indie creators are normal in the comic industry. No singular writer or company is responsible for the vast majority of comics out there, even taking behemoths like Marvel and DC into consideration. Even taking them into consideration, it didn't take long for me to find that one person writing for a DC comic wrote a script that looks very different from how another person wrote for a different DC comic. Even within the same mega comic making company, they don't have a set standard for scripts. This lack of standardization likely also has to do with the fact that comics tend to be created by small teams. Sometimes a team of one, like in my case. It can be argued that most writers are simply writing in a way that makes their vision as clear as possible for their artist. It's not like the movie industry where scripts have a standard because about 1 million people will read it in the process of making and selling a movie. Comics just have to be written in a way that allows the few people who work with them to get to the final product. Quick sidebar, a lot of this ranting comes from my perspective and research into making Western comics. I did look into examples of how manga writers work with artists and found some variety, but as a Westerner, I feel more comfortable speaking with confidence about how things are done in the West as opposed to the East, where I understand standards could differ. Also, if you haven't figured it out by now, I'm talking specifically about comics that are designed to become printed books. If you're making a scrolling webcomic, everything I'm saying about breaking things into pages obviously does not apply. My point is, comic scripts are one of the early steps in the production pipeline. They're a step that readers will never see unless you go through the effort of showing it to them. You're not writing a script for the readers, you're writing a script for your artist, your editor, your letterer, and however many other people may look at your script before it's turned into comic pages. As long as your team can understand your script, that's really all that matters. My scripts are probably only legible to me, but that's okay. I'm the only one using them. That said, let's not go too far off the rails of standardization. There are a few standards that can be observed that I'll talk about now, especially if there's going to be a division between the writer and the artist. Though personally, even though I work alone, I think I'll be using a lot of these elements going forward to help make my scripts more legible and make my panel choices more intentional. Going forward, I think common practices is a much better term to use instead of standards, since, again, standards aren't really a thing in this industry. I've seen scripts that are basically just a list of important things in dialogue and order, some that use formatting like indentation to make dialogue easier to identify, to scripts that legitimately just look like movie scripts. Again, these are all examples from established comics, and even some by writers or for comics people would recognize. But I'm not here to talk about how one person does their script writing compared to some other person, so I'm leaving out any mentions of specific examples and leaving you with just the bones of these script types. From there, you can take whatever you want without fearing that it's not how that one big-name writer does it. I'm going to hone in on the 3 major elements that all scripts have in common and briefly talk about how varying scripts handled these elements. First up is pages. I mentioned this briefly in a past newsletter, but I pretty much took the freeform approach when writing and drawing for my comic. I didn't write with any consideration for page amounts or even where things would land if you were physically reading the book. I just wrote what I wanted to have happen, what the characters are saying, and who to focus on at any given time, and then made it all fit into 3 to 8 pages usually. But that was the Nico who didn't realize that things like how many panels fit onto one page was something the writer concerned themselves with. Turns out, one thing scriptwriters can agree on is that they're the ones dictating how much happens on a single page, not the artist. Every script I looked at started the same way. You've got your title, maybe an issue number, maybe who wrote it, and then, inevitably, you encounter page 1. Make sense? No complaints? Now, I did see some contention online about the relationship between pages in the comic and the physical pages of the script. Namely, I encountered this idea that 1 page of the script equals 1 page of the comic. Some writers actively minimized how much description they put into their panels, specifically so that everything about a page in the comic would fit onto the physical page of the script. On the flip side, I saw plenty of examples of comics where there is so much description being given that it's impossible to equate 1 page of the script to 1 page of the comic. Personally, I find the idea of jamming everything onto 1 page limiting. Sure, it's clean, but this isn't a resume. This is your vision in words. You can absolutely fit what's going on a comic page within the constraints of 1 written page, but I think if you have more to say, then go for it. As an artist, I'd much rather someone over-explain what they're looking for than under-explain it. But that's just me. Your mileage with your artist may vary. You may also need less description if you're the writer and the artist, like I was, which made keeping my scripts concise pretty easy. But that's also because a chunk of the context was left in my head for me to just remember. That wouldn't fly if I was handing my script over to someone else. Writer me would try to be as detailed about what I envision as possible in that case, because it's what artist me would want. Some scripts will tell you alongside the page number how many panels are on the page, i.e. page 1, parentheses, 6 panels. But I also saw the argument that people found that to be unnecessary, especially if you're the type who changes their mind a lot in the writing process. I'll put that firmly in the up to you category of script writing. Once you enter into a page section, it becomes all about panels. Buckle up, because this is where the wheels start to fall off the standardization train. As established, it's the writer's job to figure out how many panels fit within a page. This makes it the writer's job to think about things like panel size and shape and balancing visuals against the location, size, and placement of elements like word bubbles and sound effects. Based on what I was seeing from the perspective of writers, it's not uncommon that the initial planning stages have the writer pulling out pencil and paper to make some thumbnail sketches of the panel layouts. A thumbnail sketch is a rough little drawing of an idea. They're meant to give you a sense for your visuals without needing to add actual details, and can help you quickly test out multiple compositions. Some writers use this as a way to plan out the big moments and their relative positions within a story, so that they know how many pages or panels they have to fill in to get to those big moments. But I'll add the stipulation that this works for writers who are more free-form in their script writing process, which is something I can't say I am. I write a tight, dialogue-focused script first and make tweaks as I go, and I'm usually pretty set on the flow of events once my script is written. Maybe after I try this new way of script writing for a bit, that will change. I'll let you know. In any case, this is the point where writers have to start thinking about how many panels and how much story fits onto a single page. How exactly you go about that is going to be down to you and your style as a writer. But once you sit down to capture all that in a script, you have a few options. One option I observed was that following the page number, there will be a page layout section or a few lines describing how the page looks to the artist. How detailed this section gets depends on how important the panels are or how much they visually play together. For example, the page layout could be as simple as 6 panels, all the same size, arranged in a 2x3 grid, to something more complex like 7 panels. First 2 are stacked on top of each other and take up the width and top third of the page. Panels 3 and 4 are rectangular panels and share the row below. Panel 4 is larger than panel 3 to accommodate for action and dialogue. Final 3 panels are on the bottom and get progressively smaller to represent the character losing consciousness. I've also seen paragraphs that are very conversational, implying that the writer and artist know each other and their work well enough that they can talk casually about what they're looking for. On the flip side, some scripts don't have this section at all. Instead, they dive straight into panel 1 and describe each panel's size and shape as they go. I like the idea of summarizing the page layout at the top for the sake of a quick reference, though I also see the angle that as a writer-artist combo, it might feel a little unnecessary, since I already know what my plan is for a page, but again, to each their own. Whatever you decide to do, it's unavoidable that the next line in your script will say something to the effect of Panel 1. And as per usual, what happens here is up to you and your style. I discussed earlier how some people try to keep their panel descriptions as concise as possible, where some people will write an entire paragraph about what's happening. Common elements I saw across multiple examples were film terms, things like close-up of the man's face, or specifying an angle of view like a tilted angle or a bird's eye view. If you didn't describe the panel size or shape in a layout above, this is also where you describe that. Some writers include extra information like what a character is thinking or feeling, or they'll reference something from earlier to contextualize the moment. Anything to help the artist understand the meaning of the panel and the ways the characters are meant to be portrayed. Another inconsistent trait was the use of caps to identify characters and important items, like Wendy enters the diner with a black purse in her right hand. But then they stop using caps after the character has been introduced for the first time and the important item has been established. This is something carried over from the film industry, so use it or don't. Some writers use all caps for their panel descriptions, creating little blocks of text that make it easier to identify where panel descriptions are on the page at a glance. It really gives it that written on a typewriter vibe, in my opinion. Again, pick whatever feels right for you. However, keep in mind that even if you include these details, every writer gives space for the artist to be, well, an artist. Writers should have an idea of what's happening in each panel, yes, but the artist is at liberty to interpret their words and make tweaks based on what works better visually. A good writer trusts their artist to pick compositions that will sell their story best. But writers at least get the ball rolling by describing what they imagine so the artist has a starting point. And as we've seen from studying the process of designing pages in a previous newsletter, changes can be made to the paneling and composition all the way up to the final inks. So, writers, you should absolutely make an effort to understand paneling and composition. But remember that you share the creative load with an artist who understands these things too. Together, you'll find the best way to frame that big emotional moment or that casual conversation and sell your story. After a panel has been described, we enter into the third indisputable piece of all scripts, the dialogue section. This is where the characters say their lines, captions are established, and major sound effects are noted. Some scripts have the characters and captions named on the left, followed by an indent of the dialogue, which centers the dialogue on the page and leaves a clear visual as to where all the parts the person who does the lettering needs to pay attention to. Similarly, some scripts do have the character names and captions indented about a quarter of the way into the page, and then the dialogue follows. Some scripts, again, take from movie scripts with the character or caption names centered on the page and a squished-in centered box of text following it. And other scripts just have everything left aligned with no indentations of any kind. Then there's people like me who indented all the panel descriptions and had character dialogue left indented, which in retrospect was a choice. Get the picture? No one can agree on how to format dialogue. Indenting to some degree appears to be the major trend, which allows the eye to quickly identify sections of the script. But how they indent and how much are completely variable. My advice here would be to try some different formats, and if you're working on a team, see what everyone best responds to. One other variable I spotted was the use of numbering. For some scripts, each piece of dialogue was numbered, starting with 1 at the top and working down through all the dialogue on the page. This made it easier when designing the panels to identify which piece of dialogue goes where with a simple number. It also makes it easier for the person putting in the dialogue to know exactly which bubbles have which piece of dialogue. This is certainly a helpful thing to do when you're working on a team, so there's fewer chances of misinterpretation along the pipeline. And there you have it. Rinse and repeat the 3 major parts of the script until the whole chapter or issue is complete. I'm going to spend some time trying out various formats to see what I like best. Since I have the benefit of being the writer and artist for my comic, it's all going to come down to what helps me get my thoughts out and translate them into a comic. That'll be a topic for next week as I take what I've learned and apply it. For now, time to wrap this newsletter up with the painting of the week. Last week, I challenged myself to use only flat brushes for my paintings so that I could become more familiar with them. It worked, but my familiarity still felt very surface level. So I decided to take an extra week of doing the same challenge to see if I could refine my understanding even more. And this time I think I pushed the limits on what a flat brush is meant for. On the plus side, I finally laid down a really nice gradient. I took a picture during the process since I was so proud of it. The key was patience and a lot of paint laid down quickly. Feeling happy with my gradient, my next challenge was to think about what to put on top of it, which led me to covering a lot of that nice work I did and missing my undo button, and layers, and the ability to draw straight lines using built-in tools. I'll be honest, outside the bordering columns, I think most of the other stuff I added would have been better done with other brushes. But this was a challenge, and boy, I sure did make it one. On the upside, I got a very clear idea of the limits of flat brushes. Can you use them to make small straight lines? Yes, but if you're inexperienced like me, they'll look terrible, and you'd get much better results actually using a thin brush. Can you use them to create effects like foliage? Absolutely, but proceed with caution. Do I feel better about my understanding of flat brushes? Most definitely. The nice gradient is the highlight of this piece. In the future, when I feel more confident with other brushes, it could be a good demonstration of how much I've improved to revisit this image and do it well. But hey, that's why it's a learning journey. That's all for this week, gang. Thanks for watching.